question. So now I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Great, it's lovely. Thank you, Heather. And thank you to everyone who shared as well. It's really nice to hear some of the extra information about some of the courses. There's a lot more that comes out of the Everyone project than the data I'm going to be presenting. But hopefully some of the data will help you to see how some of the measures have actually been used and analysed as well. So before we get into that, I just want to say hi, my name's Laura. I'm a fourth year part-time PhD student at the University of Lincoln. As Heather said, I am funded by the Mindfulness Association. Today, I'm going to give a very brief overview of sort of what I'm looking at for my PhD, and then go into a little bit more depth about some of the Everyone project data that have been analysing. I also appreciate many of you aren't researchers, so hopefully I'm going to present it in a way that's going to be clear and understandable. But please, if anything doesn't make sense, do feel free to put things into the chat box, or I can try and explain or follow up later on as well. Okay, so just to kind of introduce you to my PhD as a whole, I'm looking at evaluating the effects of mindfulness programs, specifically the MBLC, and looking at things like cognition, looking at physiological stress, and looking at well-being. So we've got study 1 and 4 there, the Everyone project, which I'll come on to in a bit more depth in a moment. We've also got study 2, which is a systematic review. So this means drawing together all of the literature in relation to mindfulness and physiological measures of stress. So starting to look at ways that we can objectively measure stress, as well as sort of getting subjective responses through questionnaires. And then study 3, which is up on your screen there, is probably the biggest part of my PhD. This is a very big study looking at a randomized control trial, delivering the MBLC at the University of Lincoln to a student population. By a randomized control trial, that means that we're comparing the mindfulness-based living course with an active control, so seeing what the effect is against a control group. But because we're doing this at the university, we can also get a lot more in-depth measures. So for example, we get them to come into the lab and do some computer tests to measure cognition. So things like memory, things like inhibition, things like cognitive flexibility and attention skills. We're also able to look at physiological measures of stress, like I was just talking about with that review in a lot more depth. So we actually analyse cortisol, the stress hormone, and we get measures of things like heart rate variability, and electrodermal activity, which is a fancy way of saying how sweaty they get when they're stressed. So these are great ways of kind of seeing what that physiological impact of the course might be as well. Particularly, we know a lot of stress is held within the body, so good to kind of see what effects are going on there. The other thing is as well is we're obviously looking at well-being. So in particular, we use a wealth of questionnaires to explore sort of different characteristics that are associated with them. So at the moment, we've just started cohort 4, which is going to be our last cohort. We've had lots of participants complete the courses, and we've received some really nice feedback, which is great as well. There is going to be a whole wealth of data. So hopefully at a later point, I'm going to be able to sort of present to you on that randomized control trial. For now, though, we'll bring it back to the Everyone project. Thankfully, I don't need to introduce it because Heather's just done that for me. So thank you, Heather, for doing that. So the focus of the presentation today is going to be looking at 2 different sets of data that I've looked at. I've called them Everyone Project 1 and Everyone Project 2. That's just in relation to my PhD. So it's not necessarily sort of the cohorts or the numbers as they've been run. So just bear that in mind if you think that you've delivered on a particular project. So the first cohort for Everyone Project 1 was cohorts 1 and 2, which Alan initially looked at. And I've kind of expanded on that and looked into in a bit more depth, particularly with regards to the characteristics of the people on the course. The second round that I looked at that I've called Everyone Project 2 was predominantly online during the pandemic. And I know some of you helped out with that as well. So it's really nice to see you here today rather than just sort of emails. So thank you for your help, and hopefully you can start to see some of the data that's beginning to come out of that. So overall, sort of the key research questions of my PhD is really looking at the effect that the MBLC has. So with regards to things like stress and well-being, mindful attentional awareness, but then also starting to build in aspects of self-compassion and executive function, so actually how they're thinking and sort of the cognitive processes going on. We're also interested in whether or not certain demographics benefit more than others. So with that, demographics could be things like age or gender, could also be whether they're employed or not, whether they're in a relationship or not, or their education standard, for example. We also know that a lot of people struggle to attend all of the courses, so things like attendance and dropout have also been quite interesting to look at, especially in relation to sort of other mindfulness interventions, and seeing whether or not the MBLC has similar effects to other 8-week mindfulness programs as well. So to move on to kind of the Everyone Project one, quite a lot of information on the slide, but I'll give you sort of a brief overview. So this is the data for what we call cohort 1 and 2 of the Everyone Project. Like I say, previously looked at by Alan. There is some sort of refining that's gone on. We had slightly different inclusion and exclusion when we came to it. But overall, we can see that a whole wealth of people came and took part in these first cohorts. So 232 participants. We did have a gender imbalance. That is quite common in mindfulness courses, and as I'm sure many of you are aware. So 196 females and 36 males. But what's really interesting about the Everyone Project is we get this really broad range of people coming on the courses. So to start off with, we've got things like the age group, 19 all the way up to 87, and we've got a mean age of sort of around 51. We can see as well when it comes to things like relationship statuses, we had a whole different range. We also had some people that had previous mindfulness experience, and then sort of, 161 of those who did not. So this was a really nice opportunity for them to be able to get that. Again, at the bottom there, a whole different range of schooling as well. So people that, had dropped out of school before they were even 16, right up to people that had completed postgraduate study. For employment as well, we found almost half and half split between people that were actively working and people that were not working. And we'll come on to the not working a bit more later on, because there's some interesting sort of things going on there. Overall, though, really diverse populations coming in, which we don't typically see on some of our mindfulness courses. So that's what's really special about the Everyone Project. As some of the tutors were already saying, we've got people that are unemployed, carers, the elderly, recovering addicts, homeless people, hospice, vulnerable women, and a whole different range of sort of mental health and social problems as well. So to kind of look at what we were analysing, it's good to look at what we were measuring first. So we used 3 different questionnaires within the Everyone Project one. The first one is focused around well-being. Unsurprisingly, the higher the score, the higher the well-being. We've then got sort of our perceived stress. Again, the higher the score, the more stressed they are. And we've got what we call trait mindfulness, measured through sort of mindful attentional awareness. Again, looking at a higher score indicating more trait mindfulness. So when we looked at sort of the procedure then for this one, the courses were completed in person. So the questionnaires were also completed in person before session 1 on paper. That was those 3 questionnaires that I just mentioned, as well as a couple of additional brief questions, things like how did you hear about the course? The participants then completed the 8-week mindfulness-based living course. It was delivered free of charge, so they don't have to pay for that, which makes it a lot more accessible and possible to people as well, and facilitated by a Mindfulness Association accredited tutor. When they got to the end of the course, they then completed the same questionnaires that they did at the beginning, and we kind of looked at the differences between them. Now, the first thing is to just note about the groups that we had. So 32 groups completed the data collection, like I say, a whole different range of types of group that were coming into the Everyone Project there. And we also had a range in group size, so starting to think about group dynamics and things within the courses. So our groups range from 3 people in the group up to 21. We saw sort of a mean age of around 11 people in each group. And the completed group size is sort of who managed to get to the end of the course completing the 8-week course. So for that, we saw the sort of group sizes reduced slightly, so 2 to 17 participants with a mean of around 7 in the group. And this showed us that the dropout ranged as well. So there were some groups where there was no dropout, and then we had one group where there was actually 81.82% dropout. So you can see, massive amount of people not making it to that completion stage. Now, overall, the mean amount of dropout across these groups was around 34%. So if you imagine losing sort of a third of the group that you might have started with, actually, when we look at previous research, this is quite consistent. So Nam and Tanito found that actually ranges from sort of 5 up to sort of, 63%, but the average is around 29%. So we can see that losing around a third is what we might expect for an 8-week course. We've also got this information at what we call baseline. So this is at the beginning of the course, so before they've started their 8 weeks, and we can already start to see some interesting information about some of the demographics of the people in the groups. So for example, if we go across to gender, what we can see is that female participants were reporting lower well-being scores than males. And we can also see that males were reporting higher trait mindfulness than females. In addition to that, we can also see a positive correlation between age and trait mindfulness. So the older people were getting, the more their trait mindfulness was being present. And perhaps that's from a better understanding of what we meant by it through the questions as well. With regards to previous experience of mindfulness or no previous experience, there were no significant differences. With the employment, we can see that there were significant differences across all three measures between certain groups. So to give you a couple of examples of that, those that were employed and retired tended to have higher well-being and lower stress, whereas those that were unemployed tended to see higher stress and lower well-being. Those working and not working builds on that a bit further. So we can see, those that were working had higher well-being and lower perceived stress compared to those that were not working. For education, again, there were significant differences across all three measures between certain groups. And again, I'll come on to that with a bit of a diagram where we can see some of the effects in a moment. The main findings though, and this is a really positive and encouraging slide, so it's really lovely to be able to share this with you, is that we found hugely encouraging results that the MBLC is having a highly significant effect on all three of our main measures. So overall, when they get towards the end of the course, we can see this highly significant increase in well-being, we can see a highly significant reduction in stress, and we can see a highly significant increase in mindfulness. So overall, the course is having this hugely beneficial effect to the people that are coming onto the courses. Now, as I said, we're particularly interested in whether or not certain people might be benefiting more than others. So I'm going to show you just a couple of slides looking at some examples. So the first one is focusing in on gender. So for example, you can see here at the pre-course, the females had that lower mindful attentional awareness compared to males. But what we can see is by the end of the course, the scores are pretty much the same. So we've really closed that gap between the gender differences at baseline. Again, with well-being and perceived stress, these weren't significant results, but you can see that they're following the same sort of trend. So even though females had that lower well-being at the start, we can see that again by post-course, they're getting far similar to their male counterparts. And again, with the perceived stress, so we've got that higher perceived stress for females, but again, reducing right down, and we can see again much similar scores to their male counterparts on that measure as well. Coming on to education then, what we can see is that education influenced the increase in well-being and trait mindfulness, as well as the reductions in perceived stress, following sort of the delivery of the MBLC across the cohorts. So to give an example, we can see that those with the lowest well-being were people who only stayed in education up to the age of 16. And you can see they're quite far down on that left-hand side. But by the time we get to that post-course, we can see that, again, their scores are right up in there with the other education degrees. And the same pattern with the perceived stress. So starting off with that higher perceived stress, and then we can see becoming much closer to the scores at post-course. And again, the same for the mindful attentional awareness. So what we can see here is that potentially people, everyone is benefiting from the course, but potentially some people are benefiting more than others. As an additional illustration, we've broken down some of the employment factors. This was a bit more complicated to try and characterize because some people were falling into more than one category. But again, what we can see is some of the people that were potentially struggling the most, so the lowest well-being scores and the highest stress scores. So for example, we've got sort of our carers and our unemployed. We can see that again, for example, with the carers on the well-being, they're increasing right up more than some of the other groups at that post-course. So really just highlighting how beneficial they found that 8-week course and sort of the big change that they're seeing after the delivery of the MBLC. So coming on to Everyone Project 2, and like I say, some of you helped out with this, so thank you for all of your assistance with that. We ended up with 27 courses in total, again with a complete range of participants from different sort of areas and different demographics. We can see at the pre-course, so again thinking about that baseline, we had 256 participants. We did still have that gender imbalance, so majority females, and then we've got sort of 18 males and 2 non-binary. But what we can see as well is that we've still got that diversity. So, we've got age ranges from 19 up to 84 with a mean age of around 46 years. Now, unfortunately for the Everyone Project 2, we did see a high level of dropout. So you can see here I've put the attrition was actually 70%. So you can see by the time we get to our post-course measures, we've only actually got 78 participants left, 71 of those female, 7 male. We have still got that age range of sort of quite broad age range and a mean range of 48. This could be because it was during the pandemic and sessions running online, so there might have been other things going on. It might also be that they completed the course, but they opted out of filling in the questionnaires at the end as well. So we do need to kind of take some of that information into account with findings. Now, the Everyone Project 2, for the measures, it was the same 3 scores as we've used for the Everyone Project 1, but we added in 2 additional measures. So the first one was the self-compassion scale. So starting to think about looking at that unique selling point that the MBLC has of including compassion right from the start. An executive function using a measure called the Web Exec. 6 questions that start to look at things like concentration, inhibition, and sort of people's thinking abilities there. Procedure was exactly the same as the first round, except that the questionnaires were completed online. This was good in some respects because it means that they can't miss questions out. They have to fill them all in to get to the end. But of course, there were some drawbacks of sort of accessibility as well. We did also look at monitoring attendance a bit more strictly. So that gives us some information about how much course content people are accessing and sort of whether or not that's going to influence the results. Now, what's really encouraging is even though we've not analysed this in depth yet, we can see that the preliminary results actually support the findings of Everyone Project 1. So again, we've got this highly significant increase in well-being, we've got this highly significant decrease in stress, and this highly significant increase in mindfulness. So again, we can see, new group of people, even during the challenges of the pandemic, we can still see the benefits that the 8-week mindfulness-based living course is having. So further analysis is still waiting to be conducted in the coming months, and hopefully I'll have an update for you on that soon. So to bring this all together then, just to kind of summarise some of the key points, the research shows that the mindfulness-based living course is having this highly significant effect on improved well-being, reduction in perceived stress, and this increase in mindful attentional awareness. And the Everyone Project is succeeding in delivering to diverse groups of participants. So we can see we've got this whole different range of demographical information as well as the types of group. For the dropout, we can see that Everyone Project 1 was similar to previous literature. It was higher for Everyone Project 2, but like I say, that could potentially be due to COVID or some of the group characteristics going on. And what we can see is that the initial analysis indicates that some people do seem to be benefiting more than others. So potentially by targeting some of those groups, that could be really useful to make sure that the people that potentially need it most, because they've got that higher level of stress or lower well-being, can really access those benefits. The last one then shows the importance of kind of making these mindfulness courses accessible to these diverse groups of people. Often they wouldn't otherwise be able to access them and to access the benefits that come with them. So again, just really highlighting the importance of the Everyone Project. So the future directions, tying it back into the PhD, we are going to be completing the data analysis, so we'll keep you updated on that as well. We're going to be looking at publishing the literature. It illustrates really nicely the efficacy of mindfulness in diverse community-based populations. We're also addressing some of the previous limitations, so things around attendance monitoring, dropout, follow-up, and active control. In fact, that's already being addressed through the randomised control trial, which is going on at the university as well. And that will give us much more in-depth knowledge, which will help us to understand sort of some of the further mechanisms that might be going on that are leading to these observed changes. So I hope that was okay. I'm more than happy to answer questions. I know Heather wanted to do it at the end, so that's fine. But just to say, if we do run out of time or anything, please do feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to kind of explain anything or to go over anything again.